This week's guest on Discover the Word, author Ken Bailey, made his home in the Middle East for more than 60 years.
It was my extraordinary privilege to live for decades amongst those dear people. There are about 12 to 14 million Arabic-speaking Christians across the Middle East, and we don't even know they exist. We hear the word Arabic or Arabic-speaking, we automatically think Muslim. No, there are 12 to 14 million Arabic-speaking Christians, and it is amongst them, reading their literature, interacting with them, discovering their scholarship of the past that we don't even know exists, that I was privileged to try and look at the Gospels through Middle Eastern eyes.
And so this week we're going to discover with Ken Bailey what a difference it makes to look at Jesus through Middle Eastern eyes. Hi, Brian Heading, welcoming you to a week of conversations here on Discover the Word that I've really been looking forward to. This week, Haddon Robinson and Alice Matthews are going to be connecting on the phone with author Kenneth Bailey and talking with him about how common it is for us to read the Bible using our 21st century American Western culture eyes, rather than taking into account the distinctly Middle Eastern culture from which the Scriptures came. Ken Bailey's book, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, is packed with amazing ways to understand the Bible better with that kind of perspective. Now, as we'll hear in just a moment, Ken is exceptionally qualified to open this up for us, and so we're going to begin our time with him, hearing a bit of his story, and then having him explain how important it is that when reading the Bible, we're able to see things through the lens of Middle Eastern culture, rather than assuming that we can pour everything into the way our culture looks at things and then have that be accurate. So let's begin listening to this conversation that Haddon and Alice had with author Kenneth Bailey.
Ken, welcome to Discover the Word.
Thank you very much, Haddon.
Tell me a bit about yourself. You're talking about Jesus through Middle Eastern eyes.
Yes.
Where did you begin all of this?
Well, my parents were Presbyterian missionaries to Egypt. My father was not a preacher. He was an educator and had a doctorate from Harvard University and helped the Protestant schools of the Middle East to upgrade the quality of their church-related schools. I had 7 years of my childhood there, heard Arabic, didn't really speak it that well. I knew all the cuss words, and
That's important.
Right, and the grammar just zilch. I came back to America during the height of the Second World War, managed to escape, the family did, across Africa down to Brazil and up to Miami, and I was 11 years old. Well, then during seminary, after we felt called to ministry, I had to wrestle with my good wife in prayer as to whether or not we should return to the Middle East, because I knew Arabic was a very difficult language, and I had a head start, particularly in pronunciation, and that if I worked hard, I could get a very good accent, and this could be a huge tool in ministry. I was enough integrated into the American scene that I felt I could just go through the standard ministry of pastorates in the States. After a year of prayer, we decided we would offer our names to the Presbyterian Church for career service to the Middle East. We were sent back. I spent 10 years in Egypt, and then 20 years in Beirut, Lebanon, and then 10 years in Jerusalem, part of which I was also serving in Cyprus. And that's how I got there.
Amazing.
So you spent a good deal of your life in the Middle East.
Yeah, I can really say my home was in the Middle East for more than 60 years. From the time I was 5 years old, and now I'm 80, so you can do the math.
The title of your book is Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes.
Right.
What in the world does that mean? What do you mean, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes?
What I mean is that Jesus is a storyteller. And so any storyteller talks to an audience, and usually it's an audience of their own people. Let's imagine that Jesus, in the providence of God, had been a Navajo Indian and spoke Navajo to the Navajo people. We non-Navajos, after it's translated whatever he had to say into English, we would get part of it. We would not be misled by the part that we get. But the deeper levels of what was going on in that interaction between the speaker and the audience, the speaker being Navajo and the audience being Navajo, we would miss. And the only way we could figure that out would be to talk to the Navajos and say, why did you laugh here? or why did you get very sad here, or what was he trying to say here, or what did you expect him to say when he didn't say it, and were you shocked when he said X and Y? We would have to ask that audience, and they would be able to inform us about stuff that we would otherwise miss. Because the gospel went west, it went into the Greek world and then into the Latin world, and we gradually, historically, forgot our Semitic roots, and they just kind of dropped off the map for us. Well, it was my extraordinary privilege to live for decades amongst those dear people. There are about 12 to 14 million Arabic-speaking Christians across the Middle East, and we don't even know they exist. Mm-hmm. We hear the word Arabic or Arabic-speaking, we automatically think Muslim. No, there are 12 to 14 million Arabic-speaking Christians, and these are the people who we simply don't know about, and it is amongst them, reading their literature, interacting with them, discovering their scholarship of the past that we don't even know exists, that I was privileged to try and look at the Gospels in particular, and now 1 Corinthians through Middle Eastern eyes.
One of the things that struck me in reading the book, Ken, is the fact that we in the Western tradition tend to read a story, hear a parable. We always look for the climax at the end. But
yes.
You talk in the book about an Eastern tradition that has a number of different forms. I know you talked about the ring composition.
Yes.
You talk about
yes.
step parallelism. You
yes.
talk about these kinds of things, this prophetic rhetorical template, as you call it.
Yes.
Talk about that a bit, because I think it'll help us as we read the scriptures even in English.
Okay, very, very simply, when Jesus says, no man can serve two masters, either he will hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. He's used ring composition. The first line is two masters. The second line is hate. The third line is love. The love is then repeated. The hate is repeated. And the two masters are repeated. So these are three Hebrew parallelisms. With that awareness, let me repeat the phrases again. No man can serve two masters. There's the two masters. Either he will hate the one or love the other, then you repeat the love, or be devoted to the one, you repeat the hate, and despise the other, you repeat the two masters. No man can serve God and mammon. And we're supposed to spot those. The trouble is, we spot rhetorical styles that are a part of our literature. We don't spot styles in somebody else's literature. There was a big fish in a brook who knew he'd be caught on a hook. To his fellows he cried, save me and my pride. I'm finished, aren't I?
No, I want one more line.
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
Please do or I'll needlessly cook. Aha,
yeah.
Okay, now it's finished. Your gut tells you the story isn't finished. Now, rationally, it's finished. Mm-hmm. There was a big fish in a brook. He knew he'd be caught on a hook. To his fellows he cried, save me and my pride. Finished. The poor fish is going to get caught.
Mm-hmm.
But we know, because we know limericks, that there's another line, and we know that the last line is going to go da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and we know it's going to rhyme with the first line.
Mm-hmm.
I've done this dozens of times where there were, let's say, Africans and Asians and Americans, or people with Anglo-Saxon background in the same room, and I quote this, and I say, now, how many of you who are not Anglo-Saxon in origin, how many of you notice that there's a line missing? No hands go up. How many of the rest of you know there's a line missing? They all go up.
Interesting.
That's our problem.
So there's a case in which the cultures conflict in the sense that people hear stories in different ways.
That's right, and they read literature in different ways, and they immediately spot things in different ways.
And I was fascinated going through your book at how prevalent these Eastern templates are that you're talking about, that they just seem to be everywhere, and how totally unaware of them I have been in terms of that kind of structure.
That's very true, and our number system doesn't help us. The chapter numbers were put in by the Greeks in the 4th or 5th century. We didn't have any verse numbers until Stephanos, a publisher in Paris in 1551, put them in. And he put in the numbers. He got his galley proofs, and he took them home at night. And in the morning, on his horse, On his way to the print shop, he put dots on the page. That we know is true. Then the wags come in and say he didn't have his coffee most mornings, a little bit sleepy, kind of nodded while his pen would fall on the page and make dots, and then he gave it to his printers and say, here's where you put in the verse numbers. The first part is true. The second part is probably apocryphal. In any case, that's the kind of scholarship that went into it. One printer riding his horse to his shop in 1551 put in the numbers.
You mean the verse numbers?
Verse numbers, yes.
And we all know how misleading that is in so many cases.
Right.
An idea is broken between two chapters,
Exactly.
or within a chapter, an idea is interrupted with that numbering. And then I think even more recent editors have put in paragraph headings, which can be very misleading.
What we also need to take into account is the fact that the Coptic Church in Egypt and the Syriac Church up in Syria and Iraq had a different chapter system. They put the numbers in different places. We have the chapter numbers where the Greeks put them, and sometimes they're fine, but sometimes they're in the wrong place, and we assume that the last verses in the chapter, of course, are the author winding down and bringing his conclusion. That may not be the case at all. The story of the blind man outside Jericho is one account that happens in Luke, and the story of Zacchaeus is a second account. One of them is an account of Jesus dealing with the oppressed, and the second one is a story of Jesus dealing with the oppressor. But the numbers break them apart, and we don't catch this.
It's fascinating. And our time for this interaction is gone, but we'll pick it up again. Thanks, Ken Bailey, and thank you for introducing us a bit to the book you have written on Jesus through Middle Eastern eyes. Thanks a million.
You're welcome.
All right, a special edition of Discover the Word today with Haddon Robinson, Alice Matthews, and author Ken Bailey. Glad to have you in on this conversation with us. And you know, these conversations are going to be so helpful when we move back into our study of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount next week. Having these things in mind will definitely help us as we study Jesus' words recorded in Matthew chapter 6. Now, we're just getting started in this interesting discussion about perspective and those things that we miss because our culture is separated from the one in which Jesus taught and lived. Ken will be joining us all week to continue this dialogue. And Ken's book, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, really is a book worth reading. Again, it's called Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, and it's published by InterVarsity. And hey, by the way, we also have an online devotional that we make available to you if you'd like to grow with other members of a community that discuss life issues in the light of the gospel and find regular spiritual nourishment as well. Go to ourdailyjourney.org. It's free, and it's available right now. It's our newest online devotional called Our Daily Journey, and it's online at ourdailyjourney.org. All right, well, tomorrow we'll welcome Ken Bailey back to the discussion and talk about two stories in Jesus' life that we touched on today, both while Jesus was passing through Jericho. One involves a poor, blind man, and the other story involves a rich man. And so explore how Jesus came to reach both those who are being oppressed and those who are doing the oppressing. That's Tuesday, right here on Discover the Word. We'll see you then. Discover the Word is provided by RBC Ministries.